from the moment we are old enough to ask questions. We are given a very specific story about death. We are told it is an ending, or a beginning, or a necessary doorway to something better. Depending on culture or belief, it becomes a reward, a punishment, a rest, or a mystery meant to be accepted rather than examined. What almost no one is encouraged to do is stop and ask a quieter, more unsettling question: who decided this story, and why was it the only one allowed to survive? Across history, death has been framed as something that resolves life. You suffer, you struggle, you endure, and then death balances the equation. It gives meaning to pain. It promises closure. This idea is comforting, and comfort has a powerful effect. When people feel safe about death, they stop questioning it. And when they stop questioning death, they stop questioning the system that defines life. Ancient traditions, however, did not always treat death as a solution. Many of them treated it as a critical moment of confusion, vulnerability, and decision. Not moral judgment, and not a final rest, but a transition where awareness could either remember itself or become lost again. This perspective did not survive openly, not because it lacked depth, but because it changed how people related to authority, fear, and control. If death is simply the end, then life becomes about obedience and survival. If death is a reward or punishment, then power belongs to whoever claims to manage the rules. But if death is a moment where awareness can be redirected, persuaded, or recycled, then the most important work happens before death ever arrives. That idea alone was enough to make ancient teachings dangerous. Marquis, this difficult to see today is that the modern world treats death as either medical failure or spiritual abstraction. We talk about it in terms of biology, or we soften it with vague hope. Very rarely do we talk about it as a structural part of reality that interacts with consciousness itself. And yet, almost every ancient civilization that left behind mystical texts hinted at the same thing. Death was not neutral. These traditions observed that human beings behave strangely around the idea of dying. Fear, denial, fascination, and fantasy all cluster around it. The ancients believed this was not accidental. Death mattered because it was the point where identity loosened, where memory weakened, where awareness briefly became flexible again. And anything that happens in that state has enormous consequences. The truth they pointed to was not meant to frighten, but to prepare. They believed that misunderstanding death was one of the most effective ways to keep consciousness passive. If people assume nothing important happens there, or that everything is handled for them, they never develop the clarity needed to recognize what is actually taking place. If this approach to death already feels different from what you've been taught and you want, follow this investigation carefully as it unfolds, without exaggeration or spectacle. Subscribing to the channel helps you stay connected as we explore these ideas step by step, using ancient insights to make sense of something everyone faces, but few truly examine. Because before we can talk about what really happens at death, we need to understand why the original teachings about it were pushed aside, rewritten, or dismissed, and what kind of power depends on people remaining unaware of that moment's true significance. To understand the truth about death that was hidden, we need to look at something most people never question. It is not just what we believe about death, but how little attention we are encouraged to give to it. In most cultures, death is either softened with comfort or pushed away with fear, but rarely examined with clarity. That alone should raise suspicion. Ancient traditions noticed that death was treated differently from every other part of existence. Birth was explained, life was structured, morality was enforced, but death was placed behind a curtain, wrapped in promises, symbols, or silence. The ancients believed this was not accidental. When something affects everyone equally, yet remains poorly understood, it often serves an unseen function. They observed that death is the one moment where the identity built during life begins to loosen. Body weakens, sensory input fades, roles, names, and social positions lose relevance. For a brief period, awareness is no longer fully anchored to the story it has been playing. From the ancient point of view, this made death a moment of instability, not for the body, but for the system that depends on stable identity. This is why death became a blind spot, a system that relies on obedience, fear, or belief cannot afford for people to approach death with clarity. If awareness becomes too lucid at that moment, it may not follow the expected path. So, instead of teaching people how to remain aware, cultures taught them what to expect: heaven, judgment, reunion, oblivion, rebirth. Different stories, same function. Attention is directed outward, away from observation. The ancients understood that belief at the moment of death is powerful. Whatever awareness expects, it tends to move toward. Fear pulls it one way, comfort pulls it another, but belief replaces perception. Instead of seeing what is happening, awareness follows the script it has rehearsed throughout life. This explains why teachings about death became simplified over time. Early mystical traditions spoke in careful language, warning that not everything encountered after death was what it seemed. Later systems replaced that uncertainty with certainty. Clear rewards, clear punishments, clear outcomes. Certainty calms the mind, but it also closes perception. Another reason death became a blind spot is emotional. Most people avoid looking closely at it because it threatens the identity they are attached to. Questioning death means questioning what survives when roles fall away that can feel destabilizing. So, society's reinforced avoidance, framing deep inquiry as morbid, dangerous, or unnecessary. From the ancient perspective, this avoidance was the danger, not because death is frightening, but because misunderstanding it leaves awareness unprepared. If life trains consciousness to identify completely with form and death dissolves that form, then whatever happens next will be shaped by confusion rather than clarity. These why the ancients treated death as something to be understood before it arrives, not obsessed over, but respected. They believe the way you relate to identity, attachment, and fear during life determines how aware you remain when those supports fall away. Once this is understood, a deeper question emerges naturally. If death is such a critical moment, and if misunderstanding it benefits existing structures, then what exactly did the ancients believe happens when the body dies? And why was that view so carefully buried when ancient traditions spoke about death in their earliest forms? Before doctrines hardened and stories were simplified, they described it in a way that feels very different from what most people hear today. Death was not portrayed as a final judgment handed down from above, nor as a peaceful drift into nothingness. It was described as a passage through confusion where awareness briefly stands exposed without the familiar anchors of body, memory, and identity. According to these teachings, the moment the body fails is not the moment consciousness disappears. Instead, it is the moment when the filters of ordinary perception begin to dissolve. Sensation fades, but awareness does not vanish with it. What disappears is the structure that normally tells awareness who it is. Name, age, history, and social role all lose their grip at once. The ancients believed this sudden loss creates a fragile state. Awareness is present, but disoriented. Is no longer grounded in the body, yet it has not remembered its deeper nature either. This in-between condition was considered the most decisive phase of the entire human experience, because whatever happens here sets the direction for what comes next. Rather than describing a single fixed outcome, ancient texts consistently warned that what appears after death is shaped by expectation, attachment, and habit. Awareness moves toward what feels familiar. It is drawn meaning, reassurance, and explanation. This is why death was not considered neutral. It was considered interactive. Many traditions described the appearance of light, voices, figures, or landscapes immediately after death. Modern cultures tend to interpret these descriptions symbolically or psychologically, but the ancients treated them as part of the process itself. Not necessarily lies, but not necessarily truth either. They believed the post-death state was filled with convincing impressions that could guide awareness back into known patterns. The key idea here is subtle but important. The ancients did not say these experiences were evil or malicious. They said they were persuasive. I appealed to attachment, to unfinished identity. Oh, the desire for continuity. Awareness, still shaped by a lifetime of habit, tends to follow what feels meaningful rather than what is true. This is where later teachings began to intervene. Instead of warning people about discernment after death, systems replaced complexity with certainty. They offered clear destinations and fixed meanings. Heaven or hellriwa, rest or rebirth. These ideas removed ambiguity, but they also removed awareness from the process itself. The ancient view placed responsibility back on consciousness. Death was not something that happened to you. It was something you moved through, and the way you moved through it depended on how deeply you were identified with the story of your life. When that story dissolved, this is why preparation mattered so much. Not preparation in the sense of moral perfection, but preparation in awareness. The ancients believed that someone who learned to observe thoughts, loosen attachment, and recognize awareness beyond identity during life would be less disoriented. When those supports vanished at death, what they tried to preserve was not fear of dying, but clarity about it. They believed the greatest danger was not death itself, but mistaking what appears at death for final truth. That mistake, they warned, was what kept consciousness repeating the same cycle again and again. And this leads to the next unavoidable question. If death is a moment of persuasion rather than judgment, then who or what benefits from guiding awareness at that point? And what kind of system depends on people remaining confused when identity dissolves? If death is not a neutral ending, but a moment where awareness is open, disoriented, and highly responsive, then the next question the ancients asked was direct and uncomfortable. Who benefits from that confusion, and why does the system seem designed to meet awareness with persuasion instead of clarity. Ancient teachings did not frame this in terms of demons or villains in a dramatic sense. They described it as a structural problem, a system built on continuity, repetition, and control depends on consciousness returning to familiar patterns. If awareness were to pass through death with full clarity, without attachment to identity or expectation, it would not re-enter the cycle in the same way. According to these traditions, the world we live in is maintained by order, roles, and repetition. Jimmy moves forward, life replaces life, memory resets. From that perspective, death is not a disruption of the system but choiting. The danger from the system's point of view is not death itself, but awareness recognizing that it does not belong to the structure it is being guided back into. This is why the post-death experience was described as persuasive rather than forceful. Awareness is not pushed, it is welcome. Comfort, familiarity, meaning, and explanation are offered immediately. The message is subtle but powerful. Continue, return. There is more to do, more to learn, more to fix. And because awareness still carries emotional residue from life, that offer feels reasonable. The ancients believed this mechanism worked because it mirrored how life itself operates. Throughout life, people are trained to move forward, to resolve tension through continuation. Problems are solved by doing more, becoming more, trying again. Have dies not disappear at death. It follows awareness into the transition. From this perspective, confusion at death is not accidental, it is functional. Ensures that awareness does not pause long enough to recognize its deeper nature. Instead of resting in clarity, it moves toward explanation. Explanation in this system always leads back into form. This reframes the idea of judgment entirely. The ancients did not see post-death evaluation as a moral trial imposed by a higher truth. They saw it as a reflective process that used guilt, regret, and unfinished identity to persuade awareness that return was necessary. You are not punished. You are convinced. Understanding. This does not require believing in hidden beings or elaborate myths. It only requires noticing how attachment works. Anything you feel incomplete about has pull. Anything you identify with has weight. The system does not need to trap awareness violently. It only needs awareness to believe it still belongs to what it has already known. This is why the ancients emphasized discernment over belief. They warned that not everything that appears meaningful after death is aligned with truth. Meaning can be manufactured. Familiarity can be simulated. Comfort can be persuasive. Clarity, by contrast, is quiet and does not demand movement. If this perspective on death is helping you see the subject differently, taking a moment to like the video helps this kind of careful, grounded exploration reach others who may feel the same unease, but have never seen it articulated this way. And now the pattern becomes clearer. If death is a moment where awareness is guided by habit and expectation, then the real question is not only what happens after death, but how those habits are formed during life. Because whatever awareness practices here is what it carries with it when the body falls away. That brings us to the next layer of the truth. If confusion at death benefits the system, then clarity during life becomes the one thing that threatens it. If death is a moment where awareness follows habit rather than logic, then the ancients believed something crucial follows from that insight. Whatever the soul practices during life becomes its default response when identity dissolves. Does not create a new state of consciousness. It reveals the one that has been rehearsed all along. During life, attention is constantly trained outward. From childhood onward, people are taught to define themselves through roles, achievements, relationships, and personal stories. Value becomes conditional. Identity becomes something that must maintained. Awareness learns to cling because clinging is rewarded. Letting go is rarely encouraged. The ancients saw this as preparation, not accidental conditioning. A soul that believes is its body its named. Its desires will carry that belief into death. When those structures collapse, awareness searches for replacement, something familiar, something reassuring, something that promises continuation, and the system is ready to provide it. This is why they said death itself does not trap the soul. Life does most of the work beforehand. Life teaches awareness to react instead of observe, to chase meaning instead of resting in it, and to fear emptiness rather than recognize it as space. By the time death arrives, awareness is already conditioned to move, not to pause. Thou also noticed that emotional charge plays a major role. Strong attachments, unresolved guilt, and unexamined fear all add weight. The heavier the identity, the stronger the pull toward continuation. The soul does not return because it is judged unworthy. It returns because it feels unfinished. This reframes the idea of morality completely. The ancients were not concerned with sign in the modern sense. They were concerned with identification. You can live a morally correct life and still be deeply identified with fear, status, and story. From their perspective, that kind of life still prepares the soul to follow persuasion rather than clarity at death. What mattered more was awareness itself. Could it observe thought without becoming it? Could it experience emotion without obeying it? Could it exist without constantly narrating its own meaning? These questions were not philosophical exercises. They were training for the moment when all narratives fall away. This is why practices of observation, stillness, and inner inquiry appear across ancient cultures. They were not rituals meant to please a higher power. They were methods for loosening identification while the body was. Alive. A soul that learns to rest without clinging during life is less likely to panic when form dissolves. The ancients believed this kind of preparation changed the entire death experience. Awareness would not rush toward light, voice, or explanation. It would recognize those appearances without being pulled by them. It remained present instead of reactive, and in that presence, the system would have far less influence. Understanding this shifts the question again of life is training the soul for death, and if most of that training happens unconsciously, then the most important work is not what happens at the end, but how awareness relates to identity right now in ordinary moments. That brings us to the next layer of the hidden truth. If clarity during life weakens the system's grip at death, then what happens when awareness begins to detach before the final transition? And how does the structure respond to that shift? According to ancient teachings, the most important shift does not happen after death, but quietly during life, when awareness begins to loosen its grip on identity. This shift is rarely dramatic, does not announce itself with visions or sudden certainty. Instead, It shows up as a subtle change in how experience is held. Thoughts still appear, but they are seen more clearly as movements rather than truths. Emotions still arise, but they are felt without immediately becoming commands. Fear may still exist, but it no longer defines the entire field of awareness. Life continues, but something inside no longer feels completely owned by it. The ancients believed this change mattered because it weakened the habits that normally guide awareness at death. A soul trained to react instantly during life reacts instantly during transition. A soul trained to observe during life carries that same posture when the body falls away. Death does not create clarity or confusion. It reveals what has already been practiced. As this detachment begins, many people experience discomfort. Old motivations lose intensity. External goals feel less satisfying. These stories that once gave life structure begin to feel thin. This can be misinterpreted as emptiness or loss of meaning, but the ancients saw it differently. They saw it as meaning being withdrawn from borrowed sources and returning inward. This is also the point where many turn back. The system feels safer when identity is strong. Roles provide direction. Desire creates momentum. When those structures weaken, uncertainty appears, and uncertainty can feel threatening to a mind trained to seek control. The ancients warned that this is where distraction becomes more refined. Instead of pulling awareness back through fear alone, the system offers new identities. One can become the one who knows, the one who is awakening, or the one who has figured it out. These identities feel elevated entities. They still bind awareness to a story. From the ancient perspective, this is one of the most subtle traps. True detachment does not replace one role with another. It creates space. Space where awareness no longer needs to define itself constantly. Space where experience can arise and pass without leaving the same residue. This space feels unfamiliar at first because most people have never been encouraged to rest there. The ancients emphasized patience at this stage. Not effort, not striving, but patience. Recognition stabilizes. Slowly, awareness learns to remain present without collapsing into reaction. Over time, this presence becomes more natural than identification. Life continues to move, but the soul is less pulled by every movement. This internal change directly affects what happens at death. A soul that is already familiar with resting without clinging is less likely to be overwhelmed when form dissolves. When light appears, it is seen. When voices arise, they are heard, but awareness does not rush toward them for meaning or reassurance. It remains still, enough to discern. This is why ancient teachings were careful not to promise escape or reward. I did not offer certainty about what lies beyond death. They offered preparation for clarity. They taught that the greatest danger was not darkness, but persuasion. And persuasion only works when awareness is desperate for explanation. As this becomes clear, the truth about death sharpens even further. If awareness can loosen identification during life, and if that loosening changes how death unfolds, then the system has a vested interest in keeping people distracted, busy, and emotionally charged until the very end. Leads directly to the next question. How does the system respond when awareness begins to detach before death? And what signs reveal that it is trying to pull attention back into old patterns? According to the ancient understanding, the moment awareness begins to detach before death, the system does not remain passive. It responds, not through force, and not through obvious resistance, but through subtle pullbacks designed to restore identification. These responses are not dramatic events. They blend seamlessly into everyday life, which is exactly why they are effective. One of the first signs is increased urgency. Situations suddenly feel more pressing. Problems demand immediate attention. Emotional stakes appear higher than before. The system thrives on urgency because urgency collapses awareness into reaction. When there is no time to observe, identity takes over automatically. Another common response is distraction that feels justified. New responsibilities arise, new interests appear. Even meaningful causes can become consuming. None of these things are wrong in themselves, but they become tools when they prevent stillness. The system does not need awareness to suffer. It only needs awareness to stay busy. The ancients also noticed that doubt intensifies at this stage. Thoughts like "this is pointless," "I'm imagining things," or "maybe none of this matters" appear more frequently. These doubts are not accidents. They are stabilizers. The structure prefers certainty of any kind, even skeptical certainty, over open awareness. Emotional pull is another powerful mechanism. Old attachments resurface. Unresolved relationships demand attention. Regret and nostalgia gain strength. These emotions add weight to identity. The heavier the identity, the stronger the pullback toward familiar patterns, especially when awareness has begun to feel lighter. What makes this phase confusing is that nothing feels overtly hostile. Life simply asks to be taken seriously again, completely and without distance. Many people interpret this as a sign that detachment is unhealthy or irresponsible. Hey, ancients warned against this interpretation. They did not see detachment as withdrawal, but as clarity. The key distinction they made was between participation and identification. You can participate fully in life without believing it. Defines what you are. The system loses leverage when awareness remains present but unnowned. Reaction feeds the cycle. Observation weakens it. This is why ancient teachings emphasized gentleness at this stage. Fighting distraction only creates new tension. Forcing clarity turns awareness into effort. What matters is noticing. Noticing when attention is being pulled. Noticing when urgency replaces presence. Noticing when identity tightens again. If you've recognized these patterns in your own life, moments where clarity appeared and then seemed to fade under pressure, distraction, or emotional pull, sharing that experience in the comments helps others see that this is not a personal failure, but a common phase in the process of recognition. As awareness continues to notice without reacting, something important happens. The system's responses lose intensity. Urgency feels less convincing. Distraction loses its grip more quickly. Identity loosens again, not by force, but by understanding. And this leads to the next and most delicate layer of the truth about death. If the system works hardest to pull awareness back before the transition, then what happens when awareness remains clearing the body finally falls away? According to ancient teachings, the moment the body finally falls away is not experienced as darkness or collapse, but as a sudden thinning of structure. Sensation fades, weight disappears, and the familiar reference points that once defined reality lose their authority all at once. For awareness, This moment feels less like falling asleep and more like stepping out of a costume that has been worn for a very long time. What makes this edge so important is that the personal story no longer holds itself together automatically. There is no body to reinforce identity, no routine to stabilize attention, no filturi to plan. Awareness stands exposed, not as a character, but as presence. This is the point the ancients considered decisive, because whatever awareness does here is no longer guided by habit alone, but by clarity or lack of it. They describe this moment not, but as full of impressions, light, sound, movement, and meaning may still appear, but without the physical senses that once organized them. Everything feels vivid and convincing. The difference now is subtle but crucial. Awareness is no longer confined by flesh, yet it may still be confined by expectation. If awareness has spent life reacting, clinging, and identifying, it will instinctively move toward whatever feels familiar. Comfort, explanation, reassurance, and continuation all exert a strong pull. But if awareness has learned to rest without grasping, something very different happens. But though is not hushage for meaning, it simply remains present. The ancients believed this. Stillness is the turning point, not because stillness is rewarded, but because persuasion loses its power there. The system relies on movement. It relies on the soul seeking completion, resolution, or belonging. When awareness does not move toward what appears, the appearance loses its authority. This does not mean nothing appears. It means appearances no longer command attention in the same way. Light can be seen without being followed. Voices can be heard without being obeyed. Meaning can be perceived without being adopted. Awareness remains centered in itself rather than pulled outward. From this perspective, freedom at death is not an escape, but a non-movement, a refusal to confuse experience with identity. The ancients emphasized that this was not an act of resistance or rejection. It was clarity. Awareness simply recognizes that it does not need to go anywhere to be complete. This is why they warned that the most convincing illusions appear at the edge. Not frightening ones, but beautiful ones. Not threats, but invitations. The more awareness expects guidance, reward, or reunion, the more likely it is to follow what appears to offer it. Awareness that has already learned to stand without story does not feel the same pull. Does not feel unfinished. It does not need explanation. It recognizes that whatever truly belongs to it cannot be given or taken away by appearances. Achi. This edge, the truth about death becomes clear in a way that words cannot fully capture. Does not grant freedom, and it does not take it away. It reveals what has already been learned. Daddy falls. The story dissolves, and awareness remains, exactly as it has trained itself to be. This brings us to the final step. If the truth about death is not found in what appears afterward, but in how awareness relates to appearance itself, then the most important question is not what happens when we die, but how we live knowing this. Now, when the truth about death is understood this way, something unexpected happens to life itself. Death stops being a distant event waiting at the end of time and becomes a lens through which the present moment is seen more honestly. The ancients believed this was the real purpose of understanding death, not to predict what comes after, but to change how awareness relates to existence right now. Living with death seen, clearly does not create obsession or fear. It creates precision when you know that identity dissolves, that stories loosen, and that appearances do not guarantee truth. You begin to hold life differently. You still care, still participate, still feel, but with less desperation. You stop demanding that experiences complete you because you understand they cannot. The ancients noticed that most human suffering comes from treating temporary things as permanent. Roles are taken as absolute. Loss is treated as annihilation. Success is mistaken for fulfillment. When this life becomes a frantic attempt to secure what cannot be secured. But when death is seen as a revealing moment, rather than a final answer, that urgency begins to soften. This does not make life dull or passive. It makes it more direct. Attention sharpens. Relationships become clearer, not because attachment disappears, but because possession does. You engage with people without trying to freeze them in place. You act without expecting permanence. You care without demanding guarantees. From the ancient perspective, this shift was the beginning of real freedom. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within it. Awareness stops being driven entirely by fear of loss or hope of continuation. It learns to rest in presence, even while life moves and changes around it. It also changes how time is experienced. The future loses some of its grip because completion is no longer projected there. The past loosens because identity is no longer anchored in memory. The present becomes less of a bridge between regrets and expectations and more of a place where awareness actually resides. The ancients believed that this way of living quietly prepares the soul for death without making death the focus. There is no need to rehearse scenarios or imagine outcomes. Preparation happens naturally when awareness practices clarity, observation, and non-attachment in ordinary moments. The same posture carried into life is carried into transition. Sinvoy, the truth about death is not dark or threatening. It is grounding. It removes fantasy on both sides. The fantasy of annihilation and the fantasy of guaranteed reward. What remains is responsibility. Not moral responsibility imposed from outside, but responsibility for attention itself. Where is attention placed? What does awareness identify with? What stories are believed without question? These become the real spiritual questions, because they shape not only how life is lived, but how Desmond. The ancients understood that very few people would live this way, not because it is difficult, but because it requires letting go of comforting illusions. But they also believed that even partial clarity mattered. Every moment of observation weakens the pull of persuasion. Every moment of presence loosens identification. Then this leads to the final realization. If the truth about death was hidden because it gives awareness back its autonomy, then understanding it fully does not change the world overnight. Changes the relationship between awareness and the world, which is far more powerful and far more dangerous. Two systems built on fear and confusion. Then, of everything the ancients tried to pass down, there was one truth about death that could not be openly taught without changing the balance of power itself. Death was never meant to be feared, worshipped, or romanticized. It was meant to be understood, not as an ending that saves you, and not as a punishment that judges you, but as a mirror that reflects exactly how awareness has been living all along. The truth they tried to hide is simply, though is not, transform consciousness into something new. It does not automatically trap you. It reveals the relationship you already have with identity, attachment, and awareness. Whatever you cling to in life becomes heavier at death. Whatever you can observe without becoming it loses its grip when form dissolves. This is why the ancients focused so much on clarity instead of belief. Beliefs collapse when the body collapses. Stories lose their structure. Expectations lose their context. But awareness remains exactly as it has been. Truly, if awareness has learned to rest without grasping, death is not confusing. If awareness has learned to seek comfort, meaning, or continuation, death becomes persuasive. This is what made the truth dangerous. It removed authority from institutions and returned it to attention itself. No priest, no system, no doctrine could walk that moment for you. No promise could replace clarity. Threat override recognition. The responsibility was internal, and that kind of responsibility cannot be managed or controlled. Understanding this does not mean living in constant awareness of death. It means living with honesty, not mistaking survival for meaning, not confusing roles with identity, not postponing wholeness into a future moment, whether in this life or another. Life becomes something experienced fully, but held lightly. This is also why the truth about death was softened, rewritten, or buried. A population that fears death can be guided. A population that hopes death will fix everything can be managed. Population that understands death as a moment of clarity cannot be easily persuaded. Fear loses its leverage. Promises lose their grip. The ancients were not pessimists. They did not see life as a prison or death as an enemy. They saw both as conditions where awareness either remembers itself or forgets itself. The difference was never in the event, but in the attention brought to it. If you followed this entire exploration and felt something quietly settle rather than dramatically explode, that's intentional. The truth they hid does not shock. It clarifies. It does not demand belief. It invites observation, and observation is something no system can take away once it becomes natural. If this perspective on death helped you see it with more clarity and less illusion, subscribing to the channel allows you to continue these explorations with the same care, depth, and restraint as we uncover what ancient knowledge actually tried to protect beneath centuries of simplification, because the truth about death was never meant to frighten you. It was meant to return something that was taken quietly over time: your attention, your discernment, and your ability to remain aware when it matters most.